I want to let you know about a brand new Vocation trap tracker tool that we created just for you so you can follow along with us this season as we explore these vocation traps. You'll be able to assess for yourself if any of these traps are ones that you get stuck in. Plus, we created a workbook with lots of great questions and thoughts for reflection and some exercises to help you bust through those traps and find freedom. You can download the free tracker on our website at soulmakers.org/bemakedo or find the link in our show notes. Hello, welcome to Be Make Do, a Soul Makers podcast, where we explore what it takes to live out your call in the arts with spiritual wholeness and creative freedom. I'm your host, Lisa Smith, here with my producer, Dan ABH.
Hello, everyone.
And we are here to encourage you to become who you were created to be, make what you were created to make, and do what you were created to do. This season on the podcast, we've been exploring the vocation traps, sneaky mindset detours that can derail you from your sense of purpose. Now, each of the traps, the security trap, the happiness trap, the hero trap, and the chosen trap, get you distracted and fixated on unhelpful questions that lead to block, panic, rash decisions, and worst of all, we stop creating. We don't want that. And that's not what God has for you. So go back and listen to our previous episodes if you want to understand the traps a little better. And be sure to download our free trap tracker on our website, soulmakers.org. It's a great little workbook that helps you identify where you may be getting stuck with exercises to help you break out of that trap and move forward. So today's episode of the Be Make Do podcast, we're going to chat with an expert in all of this. Steve Brock is a writer, photographer, travel aficionado, and a marketing and branding genius. Steve and I were introduced to each other about a year ago through a friend, and he's quickly become one of my favorite people. He's so generous with his time and experience, and he's so encouraging and wise. If you're creative and you're not familiar with Steve Brock, you need to be. He is for sure a soul maker. His latest book is called Brand Something Beautiful, a branding workbook for artists, writers, and other creatives. It was just released in October, and it's the resource I've been waiting for because so many of us are like, I hate marketing. I don't want to be on social media selling myself. This is a different kind of book because it's for creatives. It's a how-to branding guide for creatives as opposed to like a personal influencer brand or a product organizational brand. So definitely check it out. We have links in the show notes as well as links to his other books like How to Make Something Beautiful, The Creative Wild Guide to the Paradoxes of Creativity. I know we'll have some great conversation with Steve about getting unstuck and focusing in the right direction as creatives. Let's get started. Well, hi, Steve. Thanks so much for coming and talking with us today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I have so much. I've really enjoyed reading through your book, The Creative Wild. And I think you have such an unique and interesting perspective because you come from this branding, marketing background, but you're also a photographer. So you're seeing in two completely different arenas and two different ways of thinking, but then you're also a writer and a creative in general. So you kind of have this like full circle, way of kind of seeing and getting at things. And I feel that that's a big part of what I read in your book. It's so well-rounded and so many facets of creativity. So I really enjoyed reading your book, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk with you. So thanks for being here.
No, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so can you let's just start off by you telling us a little bit about you and about the Creative Wild and your background and experience and what led you to write the book.
Background is professionally, right? It's one of the things that I think we'll probably talk about is just vocation, avocation, what you do for earning money, what you do for passion, what you believe God's called you to do, all of that, right? It's like frog in a blender. And so I've been doing the branding and kind of marketing side for about the last 27 years, actually, on the agency side. So I work with, on the corporate side, Fortune 500 corporations, mostly in the area of corporate social responsibility, but also on branding. And then with nonprofits, predominantly Christian nonprofits, again, everything from smaller ones, but usually a lot of the larger ones in the country in branding, innovation, some digital marketing, all that type of a thing. So that's been very rewarding because the work, it helps. It's nice to have a job where you're not just selling a product, but you're actually helping change lives and through the ministry side of it. But, so where the book came from, the first book that I had was called, Hidden Travel, and it came out in 2021. So 4 years ago. And it took 12 years to write because it was originally written for a Christian. It was almost like a theology of travel, until I started doing what the marketer in me does, which is, test marketing and finding out that most Christians don't care about a theology of travel, right? Because it's about thinking more deeply about how you get the most meaningful experience from any type of trip, not just a missions trip or a pilgrimage, but even a vacation. How can that be a godly, a wondrous, sacred type of experience? And then I realized that actually non-Christians really were more interested in the concepts there. So it became a book for a more of a secular audience. And I know you, Lisa, I've heard even some of our discussions. It's like, I'm not really even comfortable with those divides, but you almost have to use it as just general terms there for that. So then this became, the Creative Wild is actually almost a part 2 from Hidden Travel, in the sense that one of the key themes in Hidden Travel was, how do you use a trip, not just as a means, not as an end in of itself, like this great, wonderful vacation, but how do I use it to really explore my own, in this case, creative interest? So like my wife is a knitter, and she has friends that do trips around the world where they go to different places and they find yarn shops and they meet with other local knitters and that type of thing. I know of gardeners that do that. I know of a lot of people that use travel as the means to the end of their creative interest. And so the Creative Wild became this book that was this extension of what's that intersection between travel and creativity, even if it's for people who don't really travel. But how can you take the principles of travel, like the idea of adventurousness, and apply that to the creative process a little bit more? So that's where it ended up. And then for this one, it became more of a focus on a Christian audience, simply because there's some areas that were just not possible to talk about without mentioning Jesus, right? And talking about just the idea of grace, because one of the key themes in there is this, theme of creating as an act of grace. And so it required me to go into more specific language around that.
Wow. Such a great metaphor, because obviously, you think about life and we're constantly thinking about trying to get somewhere, and then that path and the journey itself, that kind of stuff. And I know for me, when I was little, we actually traveled quite a bit because of what my dad did for a living. And I know how much that shaped and informed the way I see and do everything, as I grew up, realizing just those experiences, even, at 7, being able to guide my parents through the airport, because it's like, oh, stop, I can show you, it's this way, or how to navigate these things, to actually being in other countries. It tests different parts of yourself.
Well, I think too, as you know from that I think it was Catherine Ham, who's the former travel editor for the LA Times. She told me something once I thought was really fascinating. She said, well, travel is creative because creativity is fundamentally problem solving. And it's true. Right? And as a traveler, you're constantly, what you were doing, in the airport there as a kid, you were problem solving. And that's just one of those areas where we tend to not think of creativity in those general terms like that. We limit it to, okay, if it's not like in the arts, it's not creative or that type of thing. That's not true at all. right?
Yeah.
Creativity, it's part of who we are. And it invades, actually, if we let it, every part of our life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I also appreciate you talking about it taking 12 years to write the book, because I've been working on this book for Soul Makers for at least that long. It just seems like it takes, but some of it is that testing out information, to see, does this really connect and is it really true? But also the same kind of dichotomy that you're talking about between between audiences and how to talk to what people actually need or what they feel they need versus what I want to say, what I feel they need.
That is honestly, I think for most creatives, that's the problem, is that we tend to see, in a lot of cases, actually can go both ways. We can either see a deeper need that people don't have, right? And they have an expressed felt need that doesn't go deep enough. Or we go the opposite and we focus on bright, shiny object that actually is too superficial, right, for what people need. And it's alignment of those two without being driven by the audience, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, being sensitive to the audience and what those needs are. It's a tricky combination, but kudos to you for not force fitting it one way or the other, right? Letting it kind of saturate and just kind of letting God guide it over time, right? It's a gift, right? You lift it up and you say, okay, what am I going to do with this, God? And you'll know the right time on that.
Yeah. Well, that leads straight into your book, and I do love it. And it was like, oh my gosh, there's so much of what you've written is so near and dear to my heart and parallels some of the things that we talk about, but also from a completely different, perspective or a different way. And for me, that is just affirming. It's affirming of what God is doing in the world, what God is doing in artists. And I know, you kind of have part 1, part 2, part 3 in the book. And we talk a lot. I mean, this is the title of the podcast, is Be, Make, Do. That calling is in these 3 sections of becoming who you are created to be, and then honing and developing and understanding what you were created to make, and then going out and doing what you're created to do, which can be multiple different things at different points in life. And, all these different kinds of things. And you kind of get into that first part of the book, those spiritual foundations for creating adventurously. Just as we were talking about having the discernment or the willingness to wait on God, or to kind of navigate that conversation between what I feel called to versus what might, what the audience or the market might want, or all of those things. I think as a Christian, that becomes one of the main challenges, I think, for how do I show up in my work in this way, whether it's in a church or it's in the marketplace. They're different challenges, but come from a similar angst, I guess.
Right.
And so this having those spiritual foundations becomes essential to be able to navigate that, because it's not just a matter of like, do I tell people I'm a Christian or not? Do I write? It's much, much deeper than that to be able to speak about or to engage that part of you and see how that shows up in different ways. So talk about some of those spiritual foundations and what you think is kind of essential.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about how that insecurity, that fear, that angst, I mean, it doesn't go away completely for any of us that are creative, because that's just, anytime you're venturing into the unknown, right, there's going to be some sort of concern. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But I think about how, the 1 John passage of the perfect love cast out fear. I feel like it's been not weaponized, but it's been sloganized to a point where we kind of lose track of this idea that, what does that really mean? And I think part of it is, one of the principles in the book is this idea we mentioned earlier about creating as an act of grace. Well, if you substitute grace for God's love there, you start to realize is, okay, if I fully get deep down right here, not just here, God's love, then it neutralizes so much of the anxiety and fear. And I think the other thing is, under the guise of like success in the world today, we have bought way into that narrative. I have friends in like the Christian writing group here where I live in the Seattle area who basically their whole goal is just to get published because that is some way of validating them, right? But the reality is like that never works because as soon as you get one book published, you don't exactly feel like, oh, wow, I'm successful. Then it's like the next and the next and next. So it's a never ending, right? You can't win that game. So to me, the idea of creating as an act of grace says you receive the ability to do that as a gift from God. And you see it as a gift, not something that you do, but something that you steward. And you steward it well by then producing the work and sticking to it. And then you treat it as a gift that you give to others. Okay. Even if you're selling it, it is still that mindset of as a gift that I can use to bless others. It changes the power dynamic that you have with your audiences because no longer is it like, oh, is the work good enough? Am I good enough? All those different concerns that we have, it becomes like, doesn't matter because I'm giving it to you. And the problem with it is back to that point we talked about or mentioned earlier of vocation, avocation is this. We have been fed a message that says you have to monetize everything. And if you're not monetizing it, you're not successful. And I just do not accept that. And I think that gets us into all sorts of problems because as soon as you go down that track, then everything is about like, how many of this thing can I sell? Right? Or how much can I sell it for? As opposed to how do I use this, the process part, to draw me closer to God, to bless others, all this type of stuff. So quite frankly, I've had people tell me like on the Creative Wild that it's like, well, it brought me to tears because there's a part in there in that first part you mentioned that says my own journey of realizing that I always thought that creativity had to be for a specific purpose. And that if that purpose didn't include people, it was a complete waste of time. In fact, almost sinful. And I've since come to realize is number one is that there are purposes that we simply don't know about that God uses things for. And that from the people standpoint is same thing as like your book that you're working on. Okay. Nothing is wasted in God's economy. So if you never, ever publish that book, it has changed who you are, Lisa. It has affected everything that you're doing so far. And we tend to kind of just say, oh, yeah, right. And ignore that part instead of saying, okay, no, that's the real reason we're doing this type of a thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's such an important message for people to hear. I talk to so many people who do get caught up in that. You know, I have a studio full of paintings that I can't get shown at X, Y, or Z place. And it is tempting, I think, or distracting. It's easy to get distracted from really enjoying art, the art making process, but also sharing it.
Right.
And I keep wondering while technology opens up all kinds of avenues, it also places a lot of limitations and difficulties into industries, obviously. And I keep wondering, like, is there going to be a day where you just start hearing about these like gatherings in the woods where, you know, people just sort of get together on the weekends and bring their guitars and, read story, do storytelling out loud, just kind of this like return to old village life, to just enjoy and share locally what we have. Like, wouldn't that be an interesting?
I think it's happening, honestly. I mean, if you look at, even go back to the 2012, I think when, kind of the idea of like the revenge of analog and some of these concepts. And I think it's just becoming more and more where people are hungering for, there's a line, actually, my wife, I mentioned she knits, but she also works in a knitting store. And I love her line. She said, people come in there that, again, I'm in the Seattle area, a lot of high tech stuff, and people will come in and they just say, I want to use my hands because I'm moving my mouse or my keyboard, but that's about it. And her line is something like, it's amazing how much using your hands feeds your soul. Right. And I think there's something about that tactical nature, the relational aspect that comes from not being, connecting simply through a device, all those different things. We all feel it, right? We know it. We sense it. I think it's just a matter of having quite honestly, the courage to act on that and to seek out that community and to value it just for its own sake. because I think we can all do it. And unfortunately, in a world of deconstructing the church, I feel like this radical need to say is like, no, I can see all the problems. I mean, I work with Christian nonprofits and churches. I see the inside skeletons in the closet, all of that. Okay. I see the worst of the body of Christ. And yet it is still, to me, God's plan A for this world. Right. And so I'm not going to give up on that, because you have like, who is it? Alain de Botton. He's a writer. One of my favorite books is The Art of Travel. He's written a ton of stuff, but he comes from an atheist perspective. And he says, why can't we atheists find community in the same way that Christians have church? We need a church for atheists, because everything we do, we just cannot achieve that same level of community. So when church is working well, people from the outside see that and they go, it's like, yeah. And I think that hunger for community around creativity is the same hunger that we have in the church. It's just we don't see the expressions of it being done as well as we would like. And therefore we kind of say, oh, I'll go over here, I'll go over there. But I think there's a way back. And I think as creatives, we should be, offering the new vision for that. So, because aren't you, okay, so on that, wasn't your architect the creative visionary? Isn't that what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's you, right? And it's people like you that to me are the hope for offering a new way of looking at this and saying like, okay, how do we use creativity towards really in some ways restoring the social fabric that we are losing in society? So.
Well, that is a huge piece of why we're doing the podcast and why we're trying to create resources for artists to help them see themselves in a role of leadership, not leadership the way that it typically looks like, or the way we typically think about it and the kind of power structure, but thought leaders, imagination leaders, the ability to evoke a possibility or lots of possibilities for what can be. And I have so many conversations with artists, there's about how do I connect or work within the church structure. And I have a lot of conversations with pastors and church leaders who are like, how do I work with artists? Because they want the creativity.
Right.
But I don't think that in a lot of senses, it's obviously threatening because institutional change is not can be good and cannot be good. But the point is, I really do feel like artists are being called to step forward as leaders to show how can we do this in a way that really is life-giving for everybody. And I don't think that's been the focus, let's put it that way anyway, for a long time.
Well, I agree. And I mean, it's easy to blame the church for that, but I think we have ourselves to blame in a little bit. And this is what I've seen, particularly since the book has come out and talking to people. On the one hand, I see it with people who don't think of themselves as creative, and I have to talk them through it. Now I have this 5-minute challenge. Give me 5 minutes of your time, and I can not necessarily convince you, but I can demonstrate why you are creative. But I think the other side is for those who are creative, who have fallen into equal but different types of siloed, stereotypical thinking that says, if I can't do my painting the way I want to do it here at church, and if they don't value that, then forget them, right?
Right.
It's like, you're a creative person, okay? You're not just a painter, right? You're not just a writer. You're not just this, right? You are a creative person. How about thinking about ways that you could use your creative abilities in new ways for the church, okay? Like even at our own church, we tried to start an artists and creatives group there, and the response was, okay, since you guys are artists, that means since you're creatives, you must be artists. And if you're artists, that means you must be painters. Therefore, can you help paint the children's wing? Right. And it's like, no, it goes way beyond that. But we didn't offer a compelling enough vision for what that other was. And that was our fault. That wasn't the church's fault. They're not equipped to think that way. So we need to kind of lead the way in that thinking as well.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to one of the very first things that you were talking about in the book and travel and problem solving. That really is, when I talk to pastors, I tell them, if you find a creative in your congregation, take them out to lunch.
Right.
And talk to them about the biggest problems or in your congregation, or what you are hoping to achieve in the next year. Like that is the best use of that time with that artist for your perspective because of the problem solving piece of things.
Well, and it's honestly, it's going to be, let's get really pragmatic. That gives you a structured topic to focus on, as opposed to tell me about what it's like being an artist, in which case you're going to go, right? And you're never going to have a common ground. But I love that because it gives them a focus. And I mean, I'm a guy, right? We like to solve problems. We don't listen well because, right, all that. But I think that applies to everyone, that we all like to be able to contribute. And that's an opportunity in which we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so we're talking about one counterintuitive thing, and that is a segue for me into another counterintuitive thing in that part one, because this also lines up with what we're talking about right now with these, what we're calling vocation traps, but they're ways of thinking about calling that tend to get you stuck by placing you kind of in the mentality that you're, pursuing something, but really maybe it's for other means, different ways of thinking. But the point is about like looking at the things that keep us stuck. And you talk a lot about getting unstuck in the book, and also that it's not necessarily a bad thing. So tell me more about that.
So we've bought into the idea that, oh gosh, I'm stuck because I've heard that from so many other people. Therefore, right, I got to be that way myself. We just kind of, and there's a point in there that I didn't call it out, but there is a line that I was thinking about that C.S. Lewis says actually about Satan. He said Satan's greatest ability to thrive is because we either overinflate his power or we underestimate it, right? And I think the same thing with stuckness. We either think, oh my gosh, I'm stuck here, but in reality, you're not, okay? Or we don't realize how we're stuck when we really are, okay? So the main thing about it is the good side is stuckness usually runs much deeper than we think. So for me, it got to the point of kind of almost like core beliefs that were helpful core beliefs or limiting beliefs, I guess you could call them.
Yeah.
And a lot of us get stuck because we fall into those things. And so we think we're stuck because I can't get through this chapter of this novel I'm working on. But the reality is it's because I got some little record playing back there saying, it's like, you know what? If you actually finish this chapter, you're going to have to finish the book. And if you finish the book, people might like it. And then what's that going to do to your life, right? And this fear of success. And Brene Brown, I think, calls it foreboding joy, where it's the sense of, right, that we don't want to commit to joy because of what that might mean. So we have all these weird, deeper level things that can get us stuck. But then, okay, the other flip side of it is, the good side is, we don't realize that, like in music, what makes music great as much as the notes are the rests that you have, the pauses. And sometimes what we think is being stuck is God's way of just saying, you need to pause here. You're going too fast. You're spinning on your own too quickly. And you need to slow down because I've got something even better for you. So a lot of those detours that we think are just like, oh my gosh, my dream is crushed. It's like God saying, oh, wrong dream, buddy. That's like, I got something so much better over here. So that stuckness isn't stuckness. It's just like kind of God's way of, it's the same issue as like unanswered prayer, right? We all hate that. But the reality is, how many times have you had a prayer that you didn't get answered in the way you wanted? And it turns out God answers it in so much better. Okay. Yeah. It's the same thing with stuckness, right? So we need to quit thinking of being stuck as a bad thing. And I think the main aspect that ties that to me is this idea of, there's a line in Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic, which gets a little woo-woo-ish out there. So I'm not sure I fully recommend the whole book, but I love this line, which is, I used to think that frustration was part of the process, the creative process. And I'm paraphrasing, but she says, now I realize that frustration is the process. Okay. And when I finally recognized that and heard that from another person, just the freedom that comes with realizing is, okay, this hardness, this getting stuck, this frustration, okay, that's the norm. And once you accept that, then it's like the line in the book is, we make creating harder when we think it should be easier.
That's so good. And you're right about the freedom of just accepting that. Of accepting the frustration is the process. Then it's not about escaping it. It's about going in, and it
Right.
feels good it's almost like setting challenges that you're like, okay, bring it on, as
Right.
opposed
Right.
to trying to avoid the challenge, avoid the pain. It makes me think about, I remember in acting school, the idea that usually, I can't even remember who said it, but or maybe I just experienced this, when I would come to a place in a script that was either like hard to memorize, for some reason, I just could not get those lines in my head, or something in the play just wasn't working in a moment or an experience, and it just didn't feel good. It just didn't go right. I came to realize that it was always in those moments where something really interesting happened, like the struggle to break that open and get whatever it is that's blocking me from remembering it or from making it feel natural or right, that in there is a key, a treasure that has to be unlocked. And realizing that then makes they're not fun, but it makes it worthwhile. And then coming with a sense of expectation, like, oh, okay, there's something here,
Right.
if I'm willing to go into it, which does change the way you feel about hitting those blocks.
Well, exactly. Not just that time, right? When you hit the next one, then you can look and it says like, okay, this isn't necessarily a block. Okay, where's the jewel, right?
Yeah.
Where is it that's buried here? Yeah.
And that absolutely translates, I think, into the spiritual life, which you were already talking about there too. And I feel like I'm learning that more and more, even just asking God to like, okay, show me the next thing. Like, what's the next truth? What's the next hard thing? And being willing to sit in it long enough. It's the same kind of thing of being willing to sit with something that's uncomfortable, that doesn't make sense or doesn't even seem good, and look with eyes to see, what is it you're going to do here? Because I know you're going to do something.
Right.
And it could be a 3 or 4, 10-year process.
Right. No, but that's sitting with it. It's funny because the follow-up book to The Creative Wild is called Make Something Beautiful, and the subtitle is The Paradoxes of Creativity and How to Make Them Work for You. So it's really more like a gift book for a secular audience. So I have something for both. Because ironically, maybe not ironically, that most of my artist friends, that's kind of the divide you saw in the book, is like, as a Christian, our Christian friends they think we're kind of weird for our creativity.
Right.
Right. And our non-Christian friends think we're kind of weird because we believe in this guy, Jesus. Right. So that was the impetus for that book. But this idea of the paradoxes. So that's exactly what you're really talking about, is most of this, those of particularly have grown up like in an evangelical culture,
right,
have been kind of trained to, no, it's an either or, black and white. You got to move. The clarity shows up when you can see it in those clear terms. And the more I look at the gospel, particularly something like the Sermon on the Mount, it's like, oh, I do not see that black and white there. Grace is not black and white. I mean, the Pharisees, they're really good at black and white, but grace, not so much so. And so, kind of a life philosophy that has come out even of writing this has just been this both and type of equation that says, I have to live in the discomfort of not knowing in the middle of that paradox, because in that paradox is where God can most be found, not in the simple answers that I wanted to turn to. I want to be simple. I want the black and white, but I don't see God showing up there, because the minute you take that out of it, you've removed the mystery. And how big is mystery, right, to our faith?
Yeah. I'm just thinking that may be the crux of the challenge between, or for an artist of faith, or an artist working within the church, or an artist trying to, as a Christian, create, because it is that paradox thing. It is being comfortable with the paradox. And that's what art does, right? Is explore the paradox. However, if you've grown up or been kind of steeped in a Christian culture, which doesn't make room for that, that's where it's like, okay, my artist brain is over here, my Christian brain is over here, and they don't fit together, when in reality, they fit perfectly together.
Exactly.
They're exactly what's needed. But I don't think that's obvious to a lot of people.
Well, it's because of this. You say our Christian brain and our artistic brain. What you're really saying is our westernized American
Right.
cultural Christian brain and our westernized cultural artistic brain.
Exactly.
Right? Those two don't fit together. But deeper down, right? Everything from, I mean, just look at the oft-quoted idea of Bezalel in Exodus 31 being like the first person, right, given, granted, filled with the Holy Spirit for a purpose in the Bible was for a creative artistic act. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not there by accident, right?
Yeah.
So there's reasons for it. God is the creator, a creative being, all these different things that we always box him up, right? We always fit him into these little categories and it doesn't work too well.
Yeah. 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 There's so much there. And I really appreciate you pointing out too that like Western modern mindset of both Christianity and art making, because that names it. It's like, yes, they do. Because I do have this conversation with other people who are in a similar place to me, helping artists try to integrate their art and faith. And it feels like, well, it's not that hard to integrate. It shouldn't be hard to integrate. And yet it is. And the way that you're saying it makes it really clear. Yes, it is the way you're thinking about it.
Exactly.
Which then is a key to go, oh, if I think about it differently, there's a different way.
Right. And there's like a crazy freedom and a crazy joy in just knowing that there is a different way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, too often I kind of roll my eyes because like in innovation work, a lot of times you'll hear people say is, oh, well, if you can't get to the right answer, you're just asking the wrong question, which is true sometimes. But sometimes it's like you're asking the right question, but you're not living in the discomfort of not knowing long enough. So, right, same type of thing. We can't even use this as a model to say is like, oh, well, we just have to rethink it all completely because, well, not always. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So all of it. And it can feel very disorienting to a lot of people, I think. To say is like, well, there's nothing you can stand on. It's like, yeah, you can. There's this guy called Jesus, right? We can rest completely on that in what the Holy Spirit gives us to understand and things like that without having to always have this expert, one solution to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, there's so many things I want to talk to you about. Yeah, I was thinking before we were talking, I was thinking about an email that you sent me. We were talking about your completing this book and then immediately feeling like, okay, what's next? Or like that's the typical feeling. And I so relate to this, the need to be able to slow down and celebrate and rest and actually just get to appreciate the fruits of your labor in a way.
Right.
Which again, just like everything we've been talking about, is countercultural or counterintuitive in our culture. And I feel like it can be really surprising. Like I can be in a place where I feel really connected with God and I feel really creatively fulfilled. And yet something like that it's still like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? So it's almost like a little insidious thing that pops up.
Yep. It can be either, it's funny because I just had this conversation 2 nights ago with a group of Christian creatives about this what's next type of thing. And that was one of the points is like, well, where does rest fit in with all this?
Yeah.
And absolutely. I mean, so real quickly, it's funny because I have the books here. So those of you who are just listening to this, you will not appreciate it. But I'm holding up a copy of Hidden Travel, okay, which is my first book. And when this came, my reaction was, okay, that's great. Now, where are there any typos? How did the publisher handle this? Things like that. And then, away it goes. Now I'm holding up The Creative Wild. And when this came, I actually had my wife and friends just said, stop, celebrate that, hold it and just say, it's like, hey, I did this, right? Thank you, God. Thank you for this, right? So take time to celebrate. But then there is that point of the next thing. And so what I shared the other night, I think is true, but it's not the only answer because I think a big part of that is the rest. But I don't think we celebrate well in general. Okay. We may party, but we don't truly celebrate. Okay. So one of the things is celebrate those small wins and the big wins and then rest and see. But I think the other thing is this issue of momentum. And we're back to getting stuck. So there is an element of having that next thing in the back of your mind, as long as it is not driving you to a point of like almost desperation.
Right.
So what I shared with the group was this: in the marketing world, in advertising, a lot of people think that when's the best time in kind of the product life cycle that you want to invest in advertising. Some people think it's at the launch, then it's at the point of growth, then it's at the point of stagnation, then it's the point of decline. And most people think, well, it's at stagnation because then you want to like boost it up and get that, going up in the right direction again. The reality is no, the best time to invest in advertising is when your product is taking off. And it seems counterintuitive. It's like, well, why if it's already doing well? Because what you're going to do is build on that momentum. And so I think like the best time to start your second book is when the first book is like 3/4 of the way through. And you don't want it for distraction, and you don't want to do it to just kind of divert yourself, because we're all good at like, procrastination, etc. But I think it is there to have that so that you don't have that fall off. It's the same thing back to travel. It's the, some people call it the post-trip blues.
Yeah.
That you get home, right? And it's like this disappointment. But the thing to me that's got me over it is on that plane ride home, I'm literally writing in my journal, what are the articles? What are the blog posts? What are the images that I can take from this trip so that when I get home, I don't feel that kind of loss.
Right.
Instead, I'm like excited about what I can do with what I've gained on the trip.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's the same type of thing. So it's keeping the momentum going rather than going to a complete stop and then just having to build that up. But again, some people need that complete stop and that complete break to rest. No one right answer. The key thing in the book, the key theme or one of them is find what works for you.
Right.
Right? Because it's going to be different for each of us.
Yeah. Yeah. You really got me thinking about what will work for me because I do tend to, if I have a day that's just filled with really great conversations and insights and I read a book or I experience something or I write something and I'm really kind of almost high on it. I get that kind of drinking from a fire hose kind of feeling. And I can, the next day I can almost feel depressed almost. And it's not necessarily like, it may be that I still want the stimulation, but it's more, I don't know what to do with all of that stimulation.
Yep.
So finding a way, thinking about it in terms of momentum, like and rest, like how do you kind of almost like have momentum that rests on a bed of air, a planned space. I don't know. I have to think about that.
Let me give you a very practical tool that relates to this, which is we all have those conversations and those high moments and stuff like that. But what do you do with what you've learned from that?
Yeah.
And what I have discovered is it's in David Allen's book. It's about productivity.
Okay.
That's, can't even remember the title, but anyway, famous book. And he talks about this idea of parking your ideas. And that means when you have an idea, if you write it down, then you don't have to use mental energy for it. So let's expand upon that. The way we work anyway, doesn't work. Matter. Same thing here is if you have a good storage place and system and a good retrieval system, you can basically undermine that almost like slight depression feeling that you're going to have, because it's like I did a workshop with Dallas Willard years ago at one of the Renovare conferences, and it was on how to live one day with Jesus. And my favorite part of it was his thing on this question is, do you treat your work as an act of faith? And what he meant by that is, do you trust God enough to complete what needs to be done, or do you feel it's all on you? Great question, right?
Yeah.
But when you start doing this, and when you have ability to just write down those thoughts, and you have a place where they can go, and then you have a place where you can come back to them later on, then it adds to that ability to trust that God will bring those things to you when you need them. But if you rely on your memory, it's like one of the lines I think it was actually in Hidden Travel, was the quote, the Confucius quote, which is, the weakest ink is stronger than the best memory.
Right.
Write it down.
Yeah, I love that. And then being able to just rest in the trusting those notes are there, and then being able to give it time. Because I think that part of that, like drinking from the fire hose thing, is the desire, the need to process it all. And it takes time. It takes time to live in that. So yeah, being able to kind of have that repository of information that you can trust, and then trust that God is just sort of working it through
right
in time. I love that. Well, before I let you go, I'm very, very, very interested in the book that you're working on, is in process, about branding for artists. This is something that I've actually been kind of, it's like it's just a word, creating a value, or a sentence, creating a values-based brand. That's something that I just like have on a piece of paper, that is something I think about, but I'm like, I wonder how you do that. Wonder what that looks like.
It's funny because working with corporations, a lot of times, because I'd say probably 70+% of my work in branding has been with Christian nonprofits, right? So sometimes when you go to, in this case, like a Walmart or a Prudential or a Microsoft, some of our corporate clients, the first question is like, well, in the area of corporate social responsibility, it's easier. But if it's simply like with a smaller corporation, they're going like, well, what do you know about product sales and things like that? You've been working over here. So 2 answers I give them. Number one is that, look, if we can sell the intangible over here in this space of nonprofits, selling a physical good, piece of cake. Okay. Number two is this, general theory is that nonprofits are really good at demonstrating their values, but they're really terrible about demonstrating the value they provide. Corporations, on the other hand, are great at demonstrating the value they provide, right?
Yeah.
But terrible about communicating their values. So it's not just for us as creatives around or even as Christians, our Christian values. It goes pretty wide.
Yeah.
But so this idea of the book is really for artists and creatives specifically, on how do you live within that, understand and appreciate and build upon those values, because those values, interestingly enough, in today's world, those are what are going to distinguish you. And the heart of a brand is this idea of distinction, right? We say a good brand has to be 4 things. It has to be relevant. It has to be distinctive. It has to be true, right? And then it has to lead to action, because if it doesn't, it's not useful to you. So the book is really about how to take these general branding principles and apply them towards creating the what I call the creative brand. And the creative brand is a little bit different. It's something that I haven't really heard anyone else talk about. But to me, it's this. You hear a lot of people talk, they won't use these terms, but they talk about an organizational brand. Nike, Apple, right? Starbucks. Those are all organizations. Then they have products. So like, for example, Apple's going to have a MacBook Pro, and it's going to have an iPad, and all those are product brands. And then you have over here on the other side, you have the personal brands, right? So like a Kim Kardashian is a great example of someone who's known just predominantly for her as personal. And you see most of the influencers out there today trying to build these personal brands. Well, I think there's an area in between the product brand and the personal brand. And that's what I call the creative brand, where it's like you are still known for you as a person. So Lisa, you have your own brand, but if it's all about you alone, that's just so much pressure. And as Christians, we tend to want to be like, I don't feel comfortable about that.
Yeah.
But if you can see it as you as a person who is stewarding this brand that looks and sounds just like you, but is actually kind of different, almost like a persona, and that person also produces products. Okay. So now it's not just about you as a person, it's about you and the product. So good example to me of creative brands are people, well-known ones like, it's like a Steven Spielberg, right? You don't go looking on his, Facebook page for what he had for breakfast or who he's hanging out with. You know him as a person that produces creative products. Okay. Same thing in Malcolm Gladwell, all these different folks like that. There's so much freedom when we can do that, because now it's not about us and the ego that comes with the personal brand, but it allows you to embrace those values that make you you, but also share that with the product side of it.
Yeah. And I think this is an important conversation too for Christians in the arts. And I don't know if it's the same now, but I think it is. I know, like speaking with a photographer friend of mine, and being an actor, or any number of situations where you are always working, or most of the time you're working with a client, or you're working with somebody else, and so there comes the questions about what work you want to choose to participate in when you may or may not be the one initiating the project. And that's part of where this sort of came from, was like, okay, well, if you start from a perspective of illustrating who who you are, what kind of work that you do, not necessarily that like, hey, I'm a Christian, I only want to do X, Y, and Z, or I don't believe in these things or those things. But even more than that, like, these are the kinds of stories I want to tell. This is the kind of outlook I have on life. It goes much deeper than just those surface, like, I don't swear in my, it's not
company or alcohol company.
Yeah, exactly. Like we talk about those things, but to really go deeper to like, what are my real, and I think people talk a lot more about values these days, but I do think that's a really important piece of how we kind of show up with our artwork, to be able to even think about that. What is it? What are we trying to say? What do we have to offer?
It's in some ways the scariest place for us, because, that's where we were most vulnerable to other people's. I mean, I won't say where it was, but there was a Christian university that I spoke at once, and I met with the marketing department, the heads of the marketing department. And one of the questions was, they knew that I had worked with the corporate social responsibility area of Walmart, and they said, how can you possibly work with Walmart? They exploit their employees. They do this. Most of their points actually were not even true. They were just rehashing these things they had heard without knowing it. And their line was, and I said, well, but we're not working with them on selling products. And he said, well, yeah, that's like being a shoemaker for the Nazis. And it's like, what, do you realize how, like, just inflammatory that illustration is, and just how far off that is? Because even if you're right, even if they were, evil company, just that mindset. So as creatives, just whatever you do, there's going to be someone out there that's going to have a problem with it. Someone inside the church, someone outside the church. If you work with an organization that you think you're doing it for values, just if nothing else, to be salt and light in this industry and to be present to these people. Someone from the inside the church is looking at that and says, yeah, you're working with these sinners, right? You're doing this, you're compromising your own values. So I think we have to, it's hard, right? And this is where we need like-minded and like-hearted and like-valued people in our tribe to support us and to hold us accountable if we start to gravitate and compromise those values. Because it's so easy to say is like, oh yeah, I'll work with this company. Yeah, I don't like what they represent, but it's a great, if I do this, then it'll get me to this, right? And then we're into the very scary, but very often practiced realm of ends justify the means, right?
Right.
But all of that, it's murky. Talk about like no black and white. But I think it's the ones where it forces us to be on our knees, first of all, right? But it does get back to the community piece. We can't navigate that on our own. We just can't,
Yeah, absolutely. That is so key and essential. And I like that you said, like valued, that not like just like-minded, but like-minded and like-hearted and like-valued. That's really.
I have a lot of friends at church that are like-minded. No, they're actually maybe like-valued, but we're not like-minded or not like-hearted, and vice versa. And not a bad thing, but just be aware of that those are not the same things.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have to think more about that. Yeah.
No, it's just that we don't all think alike. Just again, as creatives, we're not going to have people that are like-minded. They're just simply are like-hearted. They're just not going to get us. They're not going to think that way at all. But we could still find allies in terms of our values there with them. Right. And in the quote unquote secular world, we're going to find people who are like-hearted and like-minded in artistic pursuits, but they're not like-valued. And again, it's like, okay, great. So you work within that, but you're just aware of it. I think to me, the secret of like life almost is awareness and intentionality.
Yeah.
Because if we're not constantly spiritually discerning what the atmosphere, the situations we're in, then we are so easily led astray. And then if we're not then acting upon that with intentionality and we just kind of go with the flow, we're so easily led astray, and it's hard. But again, that sounds like, oh, so hard, so difficult. It's like, no, we got, again, back to this guy named Jesus. Kind of goes with this. The idea about, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, right? We co-create, we co-live, we abide with Jesus through all these things. And just in the doing of it, it just becomes over time. I wish I could say it was second nature. It still is an effort, right? It's so easy to forget. But when we do remember that, it does become so much easier.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a key in identifying why you might feel lonely in a certain circumstance, to know, well, these people were like-minded and we have these things, maybe we're even like-hearted, but we're not like-valued, or any of those three things. And that if one of them is missing, to be able, because I think sometimes people are like, I don't know why I don't fit in.
Right.
I should fit in, but I don't fit in because of these things. And that's a good rubric to look. It's like, which piece of this is missing for me? That maybe there's nothing wrong with being with these people. These are good people to be with, but I also need this other thing. That's what's missing.
Well, and the other thing in those situations, and maybe it's just me, I don't think it's just me, but maybe, I'll own it, is this. I can often feel uncomfortable in those situations because of insecurity.
Sure.
And because I'm making comparisons and things like that. So it can be very easy to misjudge those characteristics if I'm, again, not abiding and trusting in God in literally each moment when I'm feeling that loneliness.
Right. Yeah.
To say is like, God, I got you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we're in this together. And just that reminder is I don't go anywhere on my own. I always have God in and with me and all that type of stuff. It makes it much easier.
Thank you so much. Thanks for this conversation. And thank you for everything that you do and your willingness to share your wisdom and experience, because it's really, really helpful.
Honestly, I would say the exact same thing back to you, and just listening to the podcast. I mean, it's like now I'm at a point where it's like, okay, where's the next episode? Where's the next one?
Oh, that's so good to hear.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love it because you provide a perspective that is not out there that much. And just the people you talk to and how you as a host bring out these sides of people, and this thinking has been just personally to me, it's like, okay, I wrote a book on creativity. Like I should know all this stuff. Is honestly, none of us ever know it. We're all still learning. And so I learned so much just from listening to you in the podcast. So thank you for that.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Steve. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Be, Make, Do podcast. I love hearing from you about how these conversations are encouraging you and giving you freedom. It's so cool to get to share resources like Brand Something Beautiful and Steve Brock's books with you. If this podcast is up your alley, please go over to our website, soulmakers.org, and join our community by signing up for our emails and help us spread the word, amplify the beacon, and share with other creatives so we can all grow stronger together. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Be, Make, Do, a Soulmakers podcast. Join our brand new Instagram broadcast channel at Be, Make, Do Podcast for exclusive content, episode-related polls, behind the scenes, and a chance to have conversations with us. We'd love to hear from you. All links for this episode are located in our show notes.